Welcome John Medeiros, Chief Policy Officer, Asia Video Industry Association, for this presentation. John Medeiros is the Chief Policy Officer of Asia Video Industry Association, as well as Senior Government Relations Advisor to the board. He leads the association's program of engagement with the governments and the policy community inside and outside Asia. AVI's advocacy of and ongoing dialogue with a wide range of regulatory officials on behalf of the paid TV industry are under his direction. Over to you, John.
Okay, thank you, Manoj, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to be with you today, at least in a virtual way. I'm going to talk a bit about the video industry in Asia and some of the effects on the different parts of the video industry of the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, India is a huge market with some market dynamics that resemble the rest of Asia and some that are quite different. But I hope you'll find the broader regional perspective to be of use to you. AVIA is a nonprofit multicultural trade association with 90 plus who do business in Asia. We represent the industry ecosystem that creates, packages, markets, and distributes video content in Asia. We cover cable, satellite, mobile, and broadband video delivery. Our goal is to make the video industry in Asia stronger and healthier. The subjects I'm going to talk about today include video and why it's related and how it's related to internet growth, what Asians are watching online, OTT, OCC, and VOD, and I'll define all of those. The impact of the COVID pandemic, which has some good news for some people and bad news for other people. Video innovation and consumer reactions, and the future development of the online video industry, including policy issues and regulation. Now, whoops, sorry, my slide's not advancing there. The VOD industry and the internet services industry exist in a closely symbiotic relationship. The growth of one induces growth in the other. So the foundation for video industry development is the rollout of broadband internet networks. In some parts of the world, these networks are already ubiquitous, but that's not true in Asia, where networks are still being constructed and rolled out at an accelerating pace, but with great differences remaining between different countries and regions. In much of Asia, outside of the big cities, there is still only moderate internet penetration, but it is rapidly rising. Cisco estimates that in the next few years, an additional 20% of Asia's population will be coming online. Just as the video industry looks to larger broadband networks to expand addressable markets for online video, the availability of engaging content is important to stimulate additional consumer interest in improving their own internet connectivity. These global estimates from Cisco show the rising trend in internet traffic, as well as the predominant role of video in this development. Within 2 years, Cisco forecasts that over 80% of global internet traffic will be video. The ongoing development of internet-based video viewing options is increasing the bandwidth intensity of consumer connections. Cisco estimated that one consumer connection to an HD television that is operated for 2 to 3 hours a day draws as much bandwidth on average as all other applications in the household all day long. And then a 4K TV operates at more than double the bitrate of that HD TV. So you can see that we have more households being connected in Asia all the time, and each household on average is consuming much more data to watch video. Now, video services on the internet are frequently referred to as OTT services, meaning that they are provided separately from the fees paid for internet access service. There are separate fees for some video and some come without separate fees, basing their business models on advertising. This chart, which is not a statistical chart, by the way, illustrates the different components of the OTT universe. 3 of these chunks have large video components, and it's important to bear in mind the different characteristics of the different segments. The media industry focuses on professional video hosted on curated platforms. And I want to distinguish between what we call online curated content, OCC, and other types of OTT video services, including social media, user-generated content, and the illegal services that deliver pirated content to consumers. It's all video. It all drives broadband consumers and broadband growth, but the professional media industry trades in the curated content segment. OCC services are new, having gotten a serious start in Asia about 5 years ago. They're achieving considerable success because they offer consumers an unbeatable combination of convenience, choice, varied prices, and an aspect that is important for many parents, the ability to control what their family members are able to access. Both subscription and ad-supported services are thriving. Led by the massive Chinese and Indian industries, Asia has developed ad-supported options at a faster rate and rolled them out to many more consumers than anywhere else in the world. The industry is still working out the best way to monetize this fledgling business opportunity, but it seems clear that in the future, both subscriptions and advertising are likely to play key roles in shaping industry revenues. This chart shows a selection of the OCC services that are available in the ASEAN countries. Players, as you can see, are global, regional, and local. The success of local Asian platforms has been particularly pronounced in markets where language and culture create a particular demand for locally created content. Here's a list of OCC services that are available in India. Now, I hope this list is up to date, but it's very difficult to keep up with the dynamism of the Indian market. And of course, India has many languages and therefore many opportunities for targeted OCC services. When consumers are asked why they choose curated online platforms, here are their leading answers. The control over content line, by the way, refers to individual control over what they watch and when they watch it, as well as parental control, the ability for parents to set the parameters for family viewing. Consumers are acutely aware that they have a large range of choices. Asian consumers seem to like ad-supported models, which they don't have to pay for. The competitive landscape is different from one region to another. This chart illustrates that the absolute emperor of video supply in Southeast Asia is an ad-supported service showing user-generated content. Therefore, it's not part of our OCC universe, but that's YouTube. In Southeast Asia, YouTube accounts for 85% of overall streaming. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to find similar data for India. It probably exists somewhere. I suspect the YouTube market share is somewhat lower in India, given the presence of very many active ad-supported competitors there. But the share will still be very large. So when we talk about overall VOD, we have to keep in mind that a creative industry, including the Indian creative industry, has different potential outlets for its output. There are subscription services, there are free curated services, there are different language-based services, and there are combinations of all of these, plus user-generated content and social media platforms. Of course, the return to a creator is much, much higher from a premium subscription-supported service than from a UGC service, for example. So we've talked about different business models that coexist within the VOD industry. Similarly, within the TV industry as a whole, different business models coexist, but some are growing faster than others. This chart, with data from the consultancy Media Partners Asia, aggregates all the revenue of the TV industry in the Asia-Pacific region. As you can see, the three components tracked by MPA are the traditional free-to-air terrestrial broadcast TV industry, the cable and satellite pay TV industry, and the online video industry, the green bar at the top. MPA projects that over the next 5 years, the entire APAC TV industry will grow only at a 4% consolidated annual growth rate. But online video will grow 12%, admittedly from a much smaller base. So in 2025, all three components will still be very important. But the free-to-air industry, which suffers because its ad revenues are being eaten by online advertising, will be slowly shrinking in terms of relative revenues, while the VOD industry, including both subscriptions and advertising, will be rapidly growing. And that accounts for the growing size of the green bar on the chart that you're looking at. The basis of this strong growth will be strong competition as new entrants continue to arrive in Asia, providing new and different content options for consumers, as well as from the rollout of broadband networks, bringing millions of new consumers into the picture. Now, the situation will not be identical across different subregions, as this chart makes clear. Let's look at some of the characteristics of different Asian markets. Australia and New Zealand, which I should say Asian and Australasian, obviously they're in Australia, Australasia, not Asia. Australia and New Zealand are English language markets where international online content distributors, and specifically Netflix, are enjoying great success. Southeast Asia and Japan have very strong, commercially based, free-to-air TV industries, and those will continue to offer a strong competitive alternative for consumers who don't want to pay. India and South Korea have very well-established cable and satellite-based TV industries, which will continue to play a hugely dominant role in revenues, even as the online sector enjoys strong growth. By the way, it's worth pointing out that the FTA industry in India is defined by this data source, and therefore is shown in this graph. That's Doordarshan exclusively. India's other broadcasters, if I can use that word, are included in the pay TV line. One last word about this chart. The columns are all the same size, but the absolute economic size of these industries is obviously very different. The Chinese VOD industry is projected to have only a 40% market share in 2025, but given China's huge scale, that means revenues of almost 24 billion US dollars, which makes that by far the largest component shown on this page. Then, all right, so that's the situation in the industry at the start of 2020. Network development was going on. Convenience was a huge selling point for VOD, growing choice for consumers, and consumers were very positive to this new developing line of business in the video industry. But then 2020 became the year of the pandemic. Now, there were clear impacts of the COVID pandemic. This chart indicates the impact in a couple of the countries in the region. The first impact was that it increased the amount of time consumers spent watching online streaming video. In India, this was true as well. Total Indian internet visits rose 12% in 1 month from February to March. Average time per visitor went up 23%. Visits to news and information sites went up 32%, which was more than 40% for those over age 35. And in that market, many of the VOD services enjoyed sharp increases. Hotstar, unfortunately, was heavily tied to the sports industry, and so had a small decline, but you can see the growth in the others. The increase was initially very large. MPA has reported from Southeast Asia that streaming minutes more than doubled during the lockdown period. This seems very likely to be true across all other markets as well. When things reopened, the streaming minutes came down a bit. People had less time to spend at home watching TV. But as of July, they were still 75% more than their pre-COVID level. For the longer term, it seems likely that some new consumers have been attracted to VOD services and that a large measure of increase will remain for the long term. That's good news for subscription-based VOD services. As you can see from this chart, the estimated monthly consumer spend on subscriptions has continued to rise. But it's bad news for ad-based services. During the pandemic shutdown phase, advertisers were scared away from paying to advertise on all media. And that included TV advertising, as this chart shows. The numbers in this chart include all of the different parts of the TV ecosystem, including both online and traditional TV sectors. By the way, the case of the Philippines is quite special. The government there decided to take out some of its political briefs on the major broadcaster and deprived the broadcaster of their license. So they stopped operating totally during the period, which accounts for the very large decline in the Philippines number. So winners and losers after COVID. Commercial free-to-air TV is the biggest loser. The advertising collapse has meant an inability to monetize the fact that they had more viewers coming in. The large increases in viewership could not make more money for the industry. And it will be 2025, the analysts say, before TV ad revenues return to their 2019 levels. VOD of all types is the biggest winner. Subscription services have gained many new viewers. The second half of 2020 may be a bit more difficult as some consumers who have burned through the library catalogs and churned away from the given services. But still, the growth was so strong in the first half of the year. The pan-regional Asian service View TV enjoyed a 45% increase in viewership. That's one example. And in money terms, Netflix is likely to end the year with APAC revenues up 55%. Cable and satellite TV are hurt by declines in advertising, but supported by their subscription revenue streams. So they're not doing as badly as some other parts of the industry. However, analysts believe that once the pandemic is behind us, the long-term trend toward cord cutting and more consumer reliance on online video will resume. And the slow downward trajectory of that sector will also resume in many countries. But they will still have a durable cash cow business for many years to come. So what does this mean for Asian content? Well, the creative process in the curated video industry is dependent, even for the international platforms, on partnerships with local creators. This brings cash investments into the local industry, brings knowledge transfer and upgrades in local skill bases, and allows creators new scope to bring their visions to the screen. As this chart shows, industry analysts are expecting that a growing share of content investment in the next 5 years across all the subregions in the APAC region will be represented by the rising investments in online video services. It's good for the creative industries in another way. Partnerships between VOD platforms and local content creators give the local creative industry ready access to regional and global connections. And here's one very powerful example. Netflix in 2019 bought the rights to a Vietnamese film named Fury. Separately, the producers organized a theatrical release in the USA, making Fury the first Vietnamese film ever released in US cinemas. After the window for cinematic exhibition, Netflix's distribution kicked in and the firm's distribution went global. Once that happened, far more people saw the movie online than had viewed it in all of its cinematic release. Vietnamese film culture gained a global audience for the very first time. And you can see that Netflix did the work of putting many different versions of this film onto its platforms all around the world. Now, so VOD is changing the TV industry. It's revolutionizing how consumers think of TV. Appointment TV on linear channels is fading fast wherever broadband networks are strong enough to support alternatives. There's more choice for consumers. There's no need to buy a big bundle. They can focus, the individual can focus on what they like. Niche services bring high quality specialized content everywhere, from cooking to sports to symphonic music. And there's improved parental control of what the family is watching. There are new bundles of services to keep prices down, new formats, and as I said in the last slide, new international trade patterns with more global content flowing from other regions to America and Europe. Finally, a word about regulation. OCC services are not the same as traditional broadcast TV. They're also not the same as other types of OTT. This sector is marked by ongoing innovation and development of new offerings that use different business models. At the same time, legitimate OCC services are in a life or death competitive battle with the dark side of the internet. The piracy platforms are very eager to give consumers high quality content for free, which they steal from legitimate producers. Governments should want to see the legitimate, innovative services succeed, and they should avoid hobbling OCC services with burdensome regulatory frameworks. The benefits of global markets will accrue to those whose domestic markets remain open, growing, and lightly regulated, I should add. If governments place excessive regulatory burdens on curated VOD services, they will lose out to the pirates who already have very large market shares of internet viewing. And that will lose opportunities for creative industries. That's the end of my presentation. I thank you all for your attention, and I think we can go to some questions now. I can see in the chat box there are a couple of questions. The first one is, what are the dramatic changes we are likely to see in the new normal era in the video industry? How is AVIA geared up to tackle video piracy? A very good question. On the last question first, AVIA has established a coalition against piracy, which brings together major content interests, which include both traditional media companies as well as new media companies like Netflix, all of whom are concerned about piracy of their lifeblood, of their creative work. And AVIA is advocating for smooth and comprehensive site blocking regimes in Asian countries that can deal with the fact that many of the pirate platforms are located offshore. They're located somewhere in the cloud. And the only way to deal with them is really for the governments to mandate internet service companies to block access to those platforms. So that's what AVIA's most pressing agenda is in the video piracy area. Dramatic changes we're likely to see in the new normal era in the video industry. Well, I think we're going to see, as I say, continued adjustment to the fact that broadband networks are rolling out, and one of the biggest rollouts of broadband networks will occur probably in about 5 years, is my guess, when consumers start to have access to real, smoothly operating, widely distributed 5G networks with lots of 5G devices in the stores. That will bring a huge change to markets which are so-called mobile-first markets, where many consumers may never have had a a fiber connection to their homes, or may still not have one, but will have a 5G mobile handset in their hands, and that'll be a huge factor in affecting the markets, as I say, in a few years. Next question is, will the growing appetite for VOD content, especially in India, show an impact on Indian cable television revenues? I think it's inevitable there will be an impact. I think the Indian cable industry is very competitive, much more so than, for example, the American cable industry, just because of the very different price points that have been applied in these two industries. The American cable industry's bundle of programming, a very large bundle, was selling for in excess of $100 a month. And when a consumer has shortage of disposable income and can get a Netflix subscription for $15 a month, or a Hulu subscription for something less than that, or a Peacock registration. Peacock is the NBC Universal platform. It has an ad-supported front door model, so a substantial one is ad-supported and free to consumers. The gulf between those price levels and that $100 a month price level is so big that consumers are really being driven by that difference. India's in a different situation because the cable bundle, it's large, it's a lot of programming, but it's much more reasonably priced. So I do think that there will be an impact of growing VOD on the Indian cable industry, but I also think that that impact is going to be slower to be felt, and that the trajectory of cord cutting is going to be much slower in India than in some other parts of the world. And there's one more question. The video on demand market is expected to grow at a CAGR of 12% over the forecast period, 2020 to 2025. VOD offers a wide array of video programs that include entertainment, films, sports, and educational programs. So what kind of content is driving the demand in the COVID era? All right, let me answer that and then go on to the next bit. The content is really everything driving the demand in the COVID era, with the single exception of sports, which has been crippled for months by the fact that sporting events were not being played. I don't think that means there's less demand, frankly, for sports. I think that means there's less supply. So the market has not shown growth in sports, but it's a supply problem, not a demand problem. Other than that, I think demand has been growing across the board. Entertainment, films, and educational programs are all things that people are proving to be very interested in seeing online. You know, and niche services, some of them are doing very well. Particular, if you're an American baseball fan, you can see baseball all over the world now. If you're a fan of the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra, you can subscribe to their website, their digital concert hall, as long as you've got that quality internet connection. And that's really the key factor that affects the demand. The last question. You mentioned the governments must not burden OCC with regulations. May I ask, what kind of motivations or incentives should governments offer to OCC instead? The incentives that governments offer tend to be for domestic production, and our advice would be that those should apply equally to OCC content. We don't think that the government should favor OCC over other outlets for creative programming, but they certainly shouldn't advantage other means versus OTT. And you know, I'm asked whether all of these 40 OTT platforms in India can coexist, and I have to say I'm not enough of an expert on the Indian domestic market, so I'm going to dodge that question. That one's too hard for me as a non-resident in India to speculate on. But it's fascinating. You know, India is a huge country with many different language groups, and that provides more opportunities in India, more potential demand in India than in any other country, including China. The media industry in China is controlled, not free, single language, pretty much. So, you know, there's going to be a lot more shelf space in India. What is the roadmap for HDR content deployment you see in Asia? I suspect that this is going to be a phenomenon. The roadmap is going to have as a first stop places like Japan and Korea, Singapore, which are very heavily wired, where consumers have access to high capacity connections. And so I would expect to see HDR content developing first in those markets and then rolling out to others. Okay, I think that's going to wind up this session. I thank you all very much for your attention, and I'm going to pass you back to the organizers at this point.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much for a brilliant presentation, and thank you for answering the questions. Thank you very much.